Would like to welcome all of you to our Provo Municipal Council meeting this evening. Call the meeting to order. We are meeting on October 29th, 2019 at 5:30 in the Municipal Council chambers in Provo, Utah. This meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City Council YouTube channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that attendees help maintain the decorum of the meeting by silencing electronic devices, being respectful to others, and refraining from applause or other outbursts during the proceedings of the meeting. I'd like to start with a roll call. First of all, Cliff, can we start with you?
Cliff Strachan.
Brian Jones.
George Handley.
Gary Winterton.
Kay Van Buren.
Dave Sewell.
Dave Connect.
George Stewart.
Mayor Kafusi.
Thank you. Our opening prayer tonight will be given by Sam Oman. Afterwards, we'll have a Pledge of Allegiance led by Jason Bako.
And ask that thy blessing help us all. In the name of the Lord Jesus, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thanks.
Would you all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We also would like to excuse Chairman David Harding, who is out of town tonight, so he won't be here with us. We have some minutes we'd like to approve. The September 24th, 2019 council meeting minutes. Are there any objections or corrections or additions to those minutes? If not, then we'll declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Brian Jones, our council attorney, I'd like him to make a statement. There's a deposit box for ballots out in the hallway, which makes this location a little bit different. Would you explain that to us?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So under state law, any building where ballots are collected is designated as a polling place. And state law prohibits what is called electioneering within 150 feet of a building that is a polling place. Electioneering is defined as any oral, printed, or written attempt to persuade persons to refrain from voting or to vote for or against any candidate or issue. The reason why we wanted to make that announcement before we open up the public comment is that because of that law, it would be a violation of state law during the public comment period to make comments aimed at the election. So we just wanted to advise you of that before we opened it up for public comment. And then did you want me to go ahead and do the public comment preamble?
One second. One other little recognition I'd like to do. Mr. Bryce Mumford, I'm sure Bryce, need to have him stand up. He's our senior political policy analyst for the council. He's been here 9 years, 7.5 years. And he has taken another position. And it's a growth position for him. He's been hired as the Chief Deputy County Executive up in Cache County. And this will be his last council meeting with us. He lives on November 7th. It's your last day with us, Bryce? But this is his last council meeting tonight. And we as a council just wanted to recognize him and tell him thank you for a job well done. And we will definitely miss him, especially at birthday time.
Council, we would like to invite Bryce to come to the middle here and get a photo with all of you. And whatever of our council staff are here will join you.
Okay, let's do that.
John.
Okay, are we ready? 1, 2, 3, cheese. There we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Mr. Chair, just a moment of privilege, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
Bryce has brought a level of competence and professionalism to the position of analyst in this city that will be hard pressed to fill, and we'll do our best with that. But he will be missed. And as I told one of his interviewers, he's ready for that kind of position. He'll do very well there, and we wish him the best.
Thank you, Cliff. And I'm not sure how we'll have birthday celebrations on the council now without Bryce to lead us in the birthday song.
We suggested Channel 17, record it and just play it.
We've got it. We'll go ahead now, public comment period, and Brian, if you'll give us instructions on that.
Yes, thank you. I'd be happy to. As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others that may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium at this time.
Time to state some important things. I live in Provo, in Edgemont, and this summer a number of neighbors in my area formed a group called Proactive Provo, and we are a pro-growth nonprofit organization. We banded together to help you, and we advocate for sustainable development, protection of green spaces, and neighbors' input. At 7 p.m. tonight, the Terra developers will present a new plan in a neighborhood meeting. Our group sent a letter to the council to delay approval for this plan or any other in the northeast area of Provo until our neighborhood, along with 2 others, create a neighborhood plan. And meetings are ongoing to create a draft which will be presented to the Planning Commission, and we have help from various people that's ongoing. We truly need to value the open spaces, the green areas, the foothills, and the mountains that are precious to Provo residents. Once something is paved over, it's gone. And I was recently in Yellowstone and was so grateful to those who had vision to save something wonderful. We have our own wonderful right here in this valley and this city. We've met with Bill Pepperone and Gary McGinn in the planning offices, County Commissioners Nathan Ivey and Bill Lee and Tanner Ainge's aide. We've counseled with the Rock Canyon Conservancy creators, all in an effort to understand and care for the precious foothills and green spaces of Provo. We know that Provo will grow and housing is needed, and we are for housing. But that housing should be affordable and in areas that are sustainable and wise, where infrastructure and transportation exist. So let's follow the guidelines of the Provo General Plan regarding the protection of the natural areas of Provo. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. On the screen right now, we have agenda items that will have comments during that. I think there are a few more. Can you scroll down? Or nope, that's all of them. Oh, there they are. And there's a item number 11 that will not be voted on tonight. We will have a public hearing on it tonight, but so we won't vote on that tonight. We'll have it on the next meeting, but there will be comments on it tonight. So I just want to get that up front for people so they know what to expect. Now go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks. So good evening, Council. I'm Mara Kafusi. I'm Angela Marek. I live in also the northeast section of Provo in Edgemont. I'm also a member of the newly formed Proactive Provo, and I apologize, I'm going to read my notes. I've had the opportunity, along with our committee members, to delve into the workings of the city government and the goals associated with Provo City. It's been quite gratifying to see that many of the goals of our group are already in place in the city's general plan. And I was pleased to find that even our christened name of Proactive Provo has already been mentioned in that general plan under the general environmental goals. And if you might give me the liberty, I'm going to quote from the general plan under the environmental goals 4.4.3. It says, work effectively as a city and with other governmental agencies and private organizations to protect, preserve, and restore its natural resources in the surrounding mountains, canyons, foothills, wetlands, shorelines, riverbanks, and associated wildlife corridor, agricultural lands, and in all city parks, and develop a citywide culture of proactive stewardship to preserve the ecological integrity of these resources. So we just happened to come up with that name without reading this. So it goes together. The desires of the city's general plan and the mission statement of at least one private organization in Provo City, namely Proactive Provo, align themselves with this sentiment. And the action question becomes, how does this look going forward? Do the actions of the city and the desired outcomes of the residents line up together in harmony? And I encourage us to work together to develop plans that will result in a plan that people will look back on in 50 or 100 years and say, wow, someone had vision. Let's make sure that our foothills and canyons, diminishing agriculture land, our wetlands, riverbanks become the central park of Provo, a legacy for our residents now and in the future. And one last note, it's easier to preserve than restore. And my big question is, what action will we take together to preserve what little green space is left in Provo? And I want to thank you for your continued support and your listening ear.
Thank you.
My name's Sam Ullman. I'm the vice chair down in Mazer neighborhood. And I just want to thank the fire department for saving the green space in our neighborhood. We had a severed gas line. They evacuated the people. Gas line was fixed. There was no fire. And considering it was on a piece of property that had hundreds of thousands of gallons of flammable and combustible liquids, that was a good thing, not having a fire. I want to thank the fire chief for following up on almost 24 complaints, fire code violations that one of the neighbors, not me, no, I wouldn't do that, had handed in photographs, lining the fire code, let's get this fixed, and they've been working on it with that business. I hope it comes to a solution that provides safety. And we would love green space in South Provo, but we also want to live. And this is a good thing for us. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Jay Goodliff, and I'm a resident of Edgemont neighborhood. I'm here to talk about 3 lessons learned from the sale of Tim Kiwanis Banoose Park. First lesson, responsibility. I am a Scoutmaster and a counselor for the Citizenship and the Community Merit Badge. One of the requirements of the Merit Badge is to choose an issue that is important to the community and identify who is responsible for that issue. Earlier this year, a Scout asked me if the mayor is responsible for Benoist Park. I replied that the mayor said it was in the City Council's hand, never mind their veto power. The Scout then asked if the City Council was responsible. I replied that City Council members had directed the neighborhood to talk to the school board since they wanted to buy the park. The Scout thought he had the answer. The school board was responsible. I told the Scout that school board members said we should talk to the City Council since the city owns the park. The Scout decided to choose a different issue. Do you see the problem? Somehow, a $2 million park was sold and no one is responsible or accountable. Second lesson, keeping obligations. In the meeting when the City Council voted to sell Benoist Park without an agreement, a City Council member informed the neighborhood that we did not have a right to a city park. When Provo City states contractually that they will keep land as a city park, quote, in perpetuity, should I expect that contract to be upheld by the city? The answer is no. So why do you expect citizens to keep any of their contractual obligations to the city? Third lesson, public participation. Some people here were elected after the process of selling the park had begun. After their election, I sent an email asking about the status of the process to those newly elected. Here's part of an email that I received back. Quote, I voiced my strong opinion as soon as I was officially sworn in, but at that point it was too late. End quote. This was January 24, 2018, before the land was surplus, before neighborhood meetings, before the environmental assessment drafts, and before city council meetings. Yet at that point, quote, it was too late. I didn't believe it, and the neighborhood repeatedly showed up to meetings thinking that our participation would make a difference, but it didn't. That politician was right. This was a done deal from start to finish, and all that public participation by the neighborhood was an empty ritual. Although I opposed the outcome and thought the process was manipulated, perhaps these are the saddest lessons of this experience. No one is responsible. We should not expect the city to follow the rule of law, and public participation is an empty ritual. I hope that by bringing this to your attention, you will provide more positive lessons in future Provo City governance. Thank you for the opportunity to share my comments.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, we'll close the public comment period and we'll go to our first agenda item. First item is a resolution requesting the recertification of the Provo City Justice Court by the Utah Judicial Council. And presenter will be John Borgett, the Director of Administrative Services.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Van Buren and the Honorable Council. State statute requires that the municipal justice courts be recertified by the Utah Judicial Council every 4 years, and the certification for the Provo Justice Court expires this coming January. We received a packet of information from the state courts, and that packet of information was completed by Rhiannon Newton, our court administrator, and Judge Romney. Along with that packet of information, by the way, is included in your packets. There was also an affidavit that needed to be submitted by the Justice Court, which has been the Judge Romney, which has been completed. Also an opinion letter from our city attorney, Steve Schreiner. And then we have before you tonight a resolution adopted by the City Council confirming this process. I would just state, as one of my responsibilities as the Director of Administrative Services is overseeing the Justice Court, and I would just let you know that it is well run. The documents that have been asked to are prepared and in order, and we are recommending that the Council approve this resolution. Any questions for me? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. This item is open for public comment. If anyone would like to comment to this item, now's the time. Seeing none, we'll go to the council. Are there any comments or questions regarding this? Mr. Winterton.
John, how often do we It's not elect, but we approve judges. And we have how many judges in our court? Judicial.
We just, well,
Is it just Judge
we just have
Romney?
Judge Romney, yes.
We don't have, and he has some assistants. Is it?
We have situations where when Judge Romney is out of town or not available, that another judge will come in and fill in for him when he's not there. And he does the same thing for some of our other courts, but Judge Romney is our only judge that's there.
And I appreciate Judge Romney. I think he's doing an outstanding job, but he is up for approval periodically. How often does that come up? You know?
You know, Brian, I'm not sure right now. I do know that does come up, but I'm not sure.
No, I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not sure that applies to justice court judges. I know that the district court judges are up for retention votes.
But not,
I'm
so
not
is
sure
he
if
an employee of the city? And I think he's an outstanding employee
Yes.
if he is.
Yes.
If that's the case. So it's an appointed position rather than a elected and
Well,
retention.
even the judges at the other courts, even at the district court, Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, they're all appointed, but they are subject to retention election only. So they don't campaign and get elected to begin with, but then they can be removed if a sufficient number of people don't vote for them when their certification comes up. I'd have to check and see if that same process applies to the Justice Court, because I just don't remember off the top of my head.
Well, I just do appreciate Judge Romney, and I'm grateful for, I'd like the opportunity to support him, and so I'm doing that now.
And just for the public to know, I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, he came in and kind of shared a state of the Justice Court and did an excellent job kind of providing an update to the council on how things are going in the Justice Court. Okay.
Seeing no other comments, we'll call for a vote on the implied motion. All those in favor? And any opposed? I guess it's not, no opposition. And we excuse David Harding, who's not here. Second item is a resolution of the Provo City Municipal Council authorizing the acceptance of Utah State Infrastructure Bank Fund loan for the airport. And this will be presented by Brian Torgerson.
Thank you, Mr. Van Buren. Brian Torgerson, Director of Public Services for the City of Provo. As mentioned earlier in our work session meeting, before you is a resolution authorizing Mayor Kaufusi to enter into an agreement with the Department of Transportation for a $5 million state infrastructure bank fund loan for use on our new airport terminal project. The terms of that loan are 2.1% interest with a 5-year repayment schedule to begin following completion of the project. Those terms are also proposed that Mayor Kaufusi finalize the terms of the repayment schedule. And that's also included in the resolution before you. Any questions?
Brian, are those terms set from them, and so the mayor has to agree with them, or are they going to negotiate those differently, do you know?
Essentially, what needs to be negotiated is when the project is completed, what is considered complete. The terms of the loan were set by the Transportation Commission when they approved the loan, or at least our application for the loan. The only question remaining is, when is the project complete?
Thank you. This is open for public comment. If there's anyone who would like to make a comment, please come to the podium.
My question, Ms. Sam Ullman from Mazer again. My question would be, does the interest start accruing when the project is complete, or does it start accruing when the loan is taken out? And if it does start accruing when we get the money, why don't we start paying it off right away? I don't know.
That's a good question. I believe the term of the loan or as far as interest begins when the project is complete. So that during that 5 years, during the repayment.
Thank you. Any other public comment or question?
Just for
Bring back.
knowledge, will you find that out for us and just let us know when that interest
I will.
begins to accrue? Thank you, Brian.
Are there any other questions or comments from the council? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote on the implied motion. All those in favor? And again, that is 6 votes for and none against, and excuse David Harding. Item 3 is a resolution appropriating $98,432 in the general fund for an economic development director position in the Development Services Department. And this will be presented by David Mortensen from the Budget Office.
Thank you, Vice Chair Van Buren, and good evening, Council and Mayor. So the Finance Division is requesting an appropriation tonight of $98,432 from general fund balance for the Development Services Department for an Economic Development Division Director. Are there any questions? We discussed this briefly in work meeting. Any questions for me at this time?
I don't see any from the council. This is open for public comment. So if there's any comment from the public on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment. And if there are no comments or questions from the council, we'll go ahead and have a vote on the implied motion. All those in favor of this resolution? And seeing that unanimous with the excusing David Harding. Item 4 is an ordinance amending the Provo City Code to correct and update section 3.08.010, officials' oaths and bonds required. And this will be presented by Brian Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After the presentation and work session, when there weren't any questions, I told Camille that she could go home, so hopefully that was okay. But as you know, this item was presented just a few hours ago in work session. This is just a code update to bring our city code into compliance with some changes made in the last legislative session in the state code regarding which city officials have to take oaths and provide bonds before they begin their service. And I could go into more detail, but I think I'll just ask if there's any questions otherwise.
Any questions for Mr. Jones? Mr. Sewell?
I was just curious what city officials are required to post bonds.
Well, when I say by posting bonds, one of the things that changed, which was in some ways probably the most important change, was that state code used to require on its face the posting of an actual bond, even though most cities, counties, local agencies didn't actually do that. One of the main changes in the state code is that cities are now allowed to satisfy the bond requirement through their insurance. And so what it requires specifically is that the mayor, the city councilors, the CAO, the deputy mayor, the police chief, the fire chief, the city attorney, department directors, treasurer, budget officer, recorder, and engineer. And those are essentially the statutory officers of the city, plus the department directors. All must take an oath, and the city must have insurance for their acts.
This is open for public comment, if anyone would like to comment to this item. Seeing none, any other questions from the council? We'll call for a vote for this motion. All in favor? Again, the vote is unanimous with Mr. Harding excused. Item 5 is an ordinance to amend the Provo City Code to identify zones where cannabis production is permitted. Mr. Brandon Larson from Provo City Planning will make this presentation.
Yes, Brandon Larson, Development Services. So the state recently amended Utah Code, Section 441A 406, that essentially requires that the city allow cannabis production establishments in all agricultural and industrial zones unless they adopt legislation to designate at least one agricultural zone and one industrial zone for that use. And so staff proposes that the city adopt legislation to adopt a definition for, the clicker's not working here, but adopt a definition for cannabis production establishments. It'd be the same definition that the state code has. It contemplates cultivation facilities, production facilities, and laboratory facilities. And along with that, we would propose that the city designate the A1-10 zone and the F1 freeway industrial zone as the one agricultural zone and one industrial zone that would permit cannabis production establishments. The idea there is the A1-10 zone is contains the least amount of land area of all the agricultural zones, 480 acres. Freeway industrial zone already allows for drug uses like for production of like codeine and painkillers and things like that. So we felt like that was a good zone for that use. And so the idea is to kind of start small and with one agricultural zone and one industrial zone, and then see if, we assume that in the future there may be other applicants who may propose that use in other zones, and then that can be addressed, other zones can be addressed in the future when through an applicant-driven application. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Yes? Oh, sorry, I saw a hand and...
We would like to also open this up for public discussions. Anyone like to comment to this item? Please approach the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public discussion and come back to the council. Any discussion from council members? We'll go ahead then and call for a vote on this implied motion.
Mr. Chair, this is probably irrelevant since nobody even has any questions, but this is a first hearing of a planning commission item, so it isn't by our handbook rules necessary to ask if anybody wants it to be continued first.
Thank you. According to our rules, then, is there any council member that would like to continue this item? Seeing none, we'll go ahead with the vote then. All those in favor of this motion? And that is unanimous with David Harding being excused. Item 6 is a resolution of intent to study the creation of a permit parking area on portions of 1625 North, 300 West, and 380 West Carterville Neighborhood. And this will be presented by the residents of Carterville. I don't know if they have a spokesperson.
First of all, my name is Mary Gall, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to hear this. It isn't for all of Carterville, it's just for the area by Macy's. And specifically the streets right behind Macy's and 1625 North right there at the top by the business park. We want to do a restricted parking, so it's restricted for residents only from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. And there's a variety of reasons that's come up. We've had, well, I guess, let me back up. First of all, I know that Provo has a big parking issue. And I'm not trying to solve Provo's parking issue, just our little teeny neighborhood. So when you review this, just know that I'm just doing this little neighborhood. And we've talked to several of a lot of students that park in our neighborhood. And we've talked to, I would say, almost every single resident in those streets. And all of them are concerned about parking. Some of them aren't excited about the idea of having to pay to park in their own neighborhood to reduce parking at night. But it does seem a reasonable way to address this issue, to restrict parking from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. like they did in the streets over by the water park. And part of the reason it came up is, one, when we put our garbage out, a lot of times we'll get up and the next day our garbage will be on the curb and it won't have been picked up because the students need parking badly enough that they're willing to put our garbages up on our curb so the garbage man can't pick it up. And then another thing that happens probably once a week or so is a car alarm will go off, and it'll go off all night long. And because the students live quite a ways away, they're not aware their car alarm's going off, so it just goes off all night long. And we have called 311 on all these things, and 311 has often suggested, why don't you guys just do something about your parking? So I took their advice, and I started talking to Austin Taylor. He's great, and he has several solutions for arranging different places for students to park. And I really appreciate his help. He took several photos at different times of day of our neighborhood. I've taken photos, and really at night is when the main issue is when the car alarms go off and our garbages get moved. Or, I don't know, in September, my husband had a birthday party. Everybody that came to it had to park clear, over on 380 to get to my house on 1625, which was, I guess not that big of a deal, but it's still, you'd like to have people able to park in front of your own home. But anyway, so that's our thought. We want to propose that we just do a similar parking permit system as they have over by the water park. And that's it. Is there any questions? I guess I let you guys do the rest, and I'll sit down and...
Stay close, so.
Okay.
Any questions from the council? First off.
I do have a question. The word residence, that means, I think we need to change that then to, is it a homeowners? Is that what we're saying or looking? Because I think students that live there along the Moon River Apartments and some of those other apartments, they are residents, but they are not homeowners.
Well, we want it to be residents because, like, for example, on my street, we live in our house, but the people across the street, they're renters. It's a couple that lives across the street, and then another couple lives in the next house. And then there's, at the first house on our street, there's a couple, but they also rent part of their house.
But they're all residents, aren't they? They live there.
Yeah, they live there. So we want it to be people who live on that street. You know what I mean? If you're gonna, you guys have a online system where you can go and apply for these permits. And so if somebody were to want to park on 1625, we would want their address, their address to reflect that. Or if they wanted to park on 380, we would want their address to reflect that they lived on 380. Is that?
Maybe you and I spoke earlier about this. I mean, there are a couple of apartment complexes, and you alluded to this, that are farther away. and they seem to have an overflow parking problems, and they're using this street as their parking lot, basically. And so they're not on the street. They're not residents of that neighborhood.
And I've
And that's why their
talked to
alarms
them.
go off and they can't hear it.
Yeah, and I've talked to them. So, for example, just to be specific, Cinnamon Tree, they barely have a few cars over there. This is according to Matt, who researched this. Not Matt, Austin, who researched this. Austin talked to the people at Cinnamon Tree, and they charge, I think it's like $50 a semester. It's not that much to park in their parking lot. And they probably have 5 or 6 extra cars than fit in their parking lot. And then Alpine Village is across the street, and they charge $150 extra a month, so their parking's a little bit more expensive for students. And they probably have a lot of students that have to park elsewhere. And then Branberry, that's just across the bridge from us, they have more than adequate parking, and they only charge about $50 a semester to park there, so they're really reasonable. But students, that's where most of our parkers come from, is Branberry. They just park there and then walk across the bridge to their apartments. But their parking isn't that expensive. They just do it because they like the idea of saving their $50 a semester. So anyway, so the majority of the people that park that I've talked to live at Branberry.
Go ahead, Dave.
So I wasn't aware that this was in process,
Okay.
but I was aware that it's a problem.
Yeah.
I've gone to visit my son who lives on that street,
Oh,
and I've heard the stories.
yeah.
Yeah.
It gets to be, I mean, and it's terrible. I mean, I feel like I get really frustrated and I react poorly when I call 311 or write letters to city council members or whatever, because I get so frustrated. I mean, if you haven't slept very well, your patience is less than it should be. And I teach school, I teach high school students, and I need my sleep and I need to be patient.
Thank you.
Is there any other question?
Any other discussion from council? I think this resolution is an intent to study the creation of a parking permit. So this isn't, we will create a parking permit program. This is an intent to study the need and then see how that would work. And I think that's the purpose for this. Okay. Well, there's no other discussion. We'll have a vote on this implied motion. Oops, excuse me. Public comment.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm the neighborhood chair for Carterville, and I have been hearing about this for 2 years, and I just want to put this plug in that this group of neighbors banded together. They've researched everything they needed to do. They met with various members of the city to find out exactly what they needed. This is a group of people that is up against. I mean, she's very kind, but oh my gosh, the frustration when they were building the hospital and the students continually, they banded together and they came up with a solution. And so I support this, and the rest of the neighborhood does too.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote on this implied motion to go ahead with an intent to study the creation of a permit parking area in this area of Carterville. All those in favor? The vote is unanimous, and we'll excuse Chair David Harding.
May I ask, what does it look like when
Go
they
ahead,
study
come on
it?
up.
What does it look like when they say they're going to study it? What steps do I need to do to help?
It goes to Gary McGinn, is it?
Well, yeah, Austin Taylor is the city parking coordinator, who you already
Okay.
know.
Yeah, so he
he'll be
knows
in
it.
charge of preparing a report. I believe that the city ordinance allows him 90 days to do that. Doesn't necessarily have to take that long. But there's a list of criteria in code that he's supposed to address, what the cost of enforcement would be, what the likely impact would be. And so he's supposed to prepare a report for the council and come back to them with all the information required by the code. So Austin be the person you'd
So
talk
you
to.
guys will let him know?
Yeah.
And then, because I've promised all the neighborhood that when it comes, I'm going to run flyers around so they can come and voice their opinions.
Well, and the next step, actually, when we get to that point, there's actually 2 more hearings in order to put the permit parking area in place. The next hearing will be the report from Austin, which will be accompanied by a draft resolution of what the permit parking area would look like if it actually went into the code. If at that hearing the council decides to go forward, then the code requires another public hearing on that actual code amendment, and it requires that everyone that's inside the designated area receive public notice of that hearing.
Okay, so that'll be the one that everybody comes to?
Right.
Okay. Just so everybody wants to know what's happening, so I'm going to email them today. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
We had a vote, didn't we?
Yes. Yeah, okay. We'll go to item 7 now, which is an ordinance amending the Provo City Code to clarify development landscaping requirements and allow for xeriscape citywide application, and presenter is Javin Weaver from the Provo City Planning Department.
Thank you. So as staff worked with different citizens, and we realized that there could be some alterations made to our development landscaping requirements that would really help staff as we have projects coming in, and really help code enforcement as they try and enforce different projects. What staff realized could be some additions would be to the definitions of some different terminology, the additional sections of xeric landscaping, and synthetic astroturf. So there's clarification for that when we have residents asking, do you allow it, do you not, and some guidelines for that. I'll just go through this right here. We have, can you go to the next slide, please? Go back one, please, thank you. So some additional terminology adding to the definitions. We went through this in the work session, but I'll go through them quickly right now. We have artificial turf grass, revised definition for ground cover hardscape, impervious landscape, a new definition for landscape area. Next slide, please. Thank you. Revised definition with landscaping, ornamental grass, permeable, softscape, turf grass, xeric landscaping, zero landscaping. Xeriscaping, which is commonly known, is a trademark term, and so we cannot use that, but xeric landscaping suffices. Xeriscaping is something we do not want in the city, and having clarification of this in the code allows for us to not allow for it. We revised the design standards to say that no more than 50% of each front, rear, and combined side yards can be impervious. This is to allow for permeability. Additionally, we have some new addition for xeric landscaping, some guidelines for it. So when someone calls us and has some questions regarding it, we can point them direction to this. This section also includes artificial turf grass requirements for that, for what they would need. Staff visited a couple of facilities to look at artificial turf grass, see what worked for them, what doesn't. One thing that we did add in here is sometimes with the turf grass you have an infill that can be sand or really small pieces of rubber, and we're saying on this code, if you put astroturf in your front yard or your street side yard, we don't want that rubber to flow into the drainage, the sewer, stormwater area. So that's disallowing for that. Staff worked with our zoning administrator to revise the installation and maintenance of plant materials. This is to really help the homeowners and code enforcement as to bring properties to compliance and to have some additional framework for what is required for a property owner. Additionally, staff revised the sections of code that said community development to the new department names that were created. And this section just coincides with 1520, so it can be cross-referenced. And then this section and the next slide both show examples of types of yards. These were based off of the definitions that are currently existing in 1406. So some people like to have an illustration for what is considered a front yard, side yard, and rear yard. Are there any questions for staff?
This is open for public comment.
And that's what we don't want. But sorry, the next two slides, I apologize. Some good examples for xeric landscaping.
Thank you, Jab.
Same old guy. I really appreciate this approach. We have several pieces of property in our neighborhood that are done this way, including my nemesis, the oil company. It's beautiful. What I don't like is the Provo City Park on 3rd South and University. That's zero landscaping, not, I think he said zeri, and it's just puncher weeds and cigarette butts. I don't know that that's where we want it to go, and the city seems pretty thorough on that because there's several places in the city that are landscaped like that out toward the far end of Center Street. At least they could plant some sunflowers. This is a great idea. Thanks.
Mr. Holman, I know this is probably somewhat annoying, and since we all do know who you are, but for the recording that is the permanent record, can you state your name, please?
My name's Samuel Ray Ullman. I'm the vice chair of the Mazer neighborhood in Provo, Utah.
Thanks so much.
United States. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mr. Holman. Any other comments? This item does fall under the direction of our council rules. If any council member would like to have another hearing on this, we can go ahead and automatically move it to the next council.
I just have a comment.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'm okay with it going forward, but Sam brought up University and 3rd South, and I'm going, we have a park there? Well, there's a piece of kind of vacant property on the corner, the northeast corner up against City View, that I'm not sure who owns it.
Southeast?
Northeast. It's very small. It's where there used to be a business, and then, yeah.
Mr. Pepperoni, will you clarify?
Thank you. The city does own it. We were given that by UDOT. They bought more land than they needed for the 3rd South rebuild. It was given to the city with the understanding it would be used for some type of public plaza or public use. We've met with the Parks Department to try to make something happen there. My understanding is they've put a request out for proposals on designs for the space. It shouldn't have weeds on it. I thought by now we were going to have gravel down to keep that from happening. But it has been talked about. It hasn't been neglected or forgotten. We just haven't gotten to it yet, and I apologize for that. It looks worse than it could. I'll agree with Mr. Oman. But I'll follow up with the Parks Department, and I'll let you know.
Thank you, Mr. Pepperoni. Anyone who wants to move this to the next meeting? Any other comments regarding this issue? Go ahead and have a vote then on this implied motion. All those in favor? It's unanimous, and we excuse Mr.
Harding.
David Harding. Item 8 is an ordinance amending the zone map, classification of approximately 11.87 acres of real property generally located at 1400 South State Street from residential R110 to medium-density residential MDR. This is in the Spring Creek neighborhood, and Aaron Ardmore will be presenting.
Thank you. So this rezone request is related to a proposal for apartment development. If we can go to the next. Do I have the control? Okay, so this area is just west of the new bus depot along South State Street. Current general plan is for mixed use. The Southeast Neighborhood Plan, as an extension of the general plan, calls for medium-density residential development. and it currently is on R110. You can see the concept plan here. The Plan Commission approved this concept plan knowing that a full project plan will have to come back to them to work out all the details to meet that MDR zone. But essentially it's 13 apartment buildings, 4 stories tall, 4 units on each floor. It's parked at 2.5 spaces per unit. They've got 10% amenity space located centrally. As you can see, kind of the dark hatched areas. They've got those. They're working on programming on those that will be developed through the project plan. But essentially what the applicant's asking for is the zone change tonight to change the classification of that property from R110 to MDR so he can move forward with that project plan. Staff feels that this is appropriate for the area. It meets the general plan and Southeast Neighborhood Plan and kind of the goals of the council for the South State Corridor. Unless you had any questions, that's all I have.
Thank you. Is the applicant John Coleman? There he is.
Hi. I want to thank all you for your time tonight.
State your name, please.
John Coleman. I represent a group called Fig Development that's actually based here in Provo. We are very excited about the opportunity to work within the city of Provo where our business resides. I don't really have much more to add that Aaron Hardy hasn't covered. If you guys have any direct questions, I'm happy to answer anything you have.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, as a neighborhood chair, Mary Miller, is she here? I don't think I see her.
She texted me earlier and mentioned that she wasn't going to make it tonight, but the neighborhood has full support of what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. This item is open for public comment, so if there's anyone from the public that would like to comment regarding this. Okay, thank you. Now, council discussions, any comments or questions for Aaron or the developer? Cliff.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to confirm, we had a communication from Mary Miller and concurs with what Mr. Coleman said, that their neighborhood approves it and thought it went well when it was in front of the Planning Commission.
Very good, thank you. Now, this item is, if there's any council member that desires to consider this item again at the next council meeting, this is one of those that we can, if anyone feels that way. If not, we'll go ahead with the vote on the implied motion.
I do have a comment.
Excuse me, Dave.
So this is down in my neck of the woods, and you notice we don't have a room full of people complaining about a high-density project. It's all about expectation, and the expectation for this property between the railroad tracks and State Street is pretty much exactly what you see. So the neighborhood kind of supports it. Maybe they would have been happier if it had things for sale, have some long-term residents, and there is a project very close by that is going to be some condos for sale. But people say, where are you going to put all the new people that are coming to Provo? Well, South State Street is one of those places.
Thank you. It's nice when it's on the neighborhood plan and everything lines up. If there's no other comments or questions, we'll go ahead. Let's have a vote on the implied motion. All those in favor? The vote is unanimous. We excuse Mr. Harding. Item 9 is an ordinance to amend Provo City Code to clarify that electronic display and animated signs are prohibited in agricultural and residential zones. This will be presented by Brian Maxfield from the Planning Department.
Thank you. This item is really a clarification that was asked for by the council because we have two different sections of the ordinance, just to make it clear that the electronic display
and animated signs are indeed prohibited in the agricultural and residential zone. So it just specifies that more distinctly. I don't know if Mr. Jones has any further input on that one.
Yeah, this is probably just repeating the same thing in a different way, but as we discussed in the work session, when the change was made in the city some time ago to allow electronic display signs to be used by businesses throughout the city, it was clear, I think, to everyone in the room that the intent was to allow that for business uses, but the code did not explicitly restrict it to business or commercial zones. And so just to prevent anyone from misunderstanding what the legislation actually meant, we recommended this clarification to show that those type of signs would not be allowed in agricultural and residential zones.
Thank you. This item is open for public comment, if anyone would like to comment to it. If not, we'll come back to council for discussion. Yeah. Mr. Winterton.
One thing I think it's important to recognize that schools are not in residential zones. They're in public facility zones. So they would be allowed to have...
Correct. And not only are they not in residential zones, but we are prohibited by state law from regulating their signs.
And so I think that becomes just something for the public to be aware of, that if I live across the street, that sign is not illegal.
Thank you. Any other question or comment from the council? This item also is one of those items that can be moved to the next council meeting, if any council member would like to do that. If not, we will either have more discussion. If there's none, we'll go to a vote. All in favor of this implied motion? The vote is unanimous, and we excuse Mr. Harding. Item 10 is an ordinance amending the Provo City Code, Section 14.5, to establish the 500 West Medium Density Mixed Use Project Redevelopment Option Zone, or ProZone. This is in the Dixon neighborhood, and it'll be presented also by Brian Maxfield.
Thank you. Apologize for my voice. I don't know if I was yelling at somebody today or something, but I seemed to kind of a little laryngitis here. This item actually goes with item 11 also. This is the adoption of a ProZone that has specific uses delineated. It involves the property on 500 West, about 400 North. The property currently has a duplex on it that was built in the 1940s, a medical office with some apartments underneath, 5 apartments that was built in 1996. You can see that here on the right. I apologize on the slides here. And then an existing apartment building of 6 units built in 1999 on the southeast corner of the property. The ProZone itself basically describes the uses on this property, at least through the permitted uses, and then also has provisions in it to allow for an overlap of parking. The recognition of parking differences for the peak hours of usage is the key to that. The peak hours of usage for the office building are in the daytime. The peak uses for the residential portion are in the nighttime. So the general feeling is there's an overlap that could work in this situation. The zone also would allow for the medical office to be considered by the number of employees and clientele that would be there at any one time rather than on a square footage basis. Using those two together makes it so an overlap of parking could work for this site. And again, getting somewhat into the actual rezoning and the property itself. This property's been there for 20 years now, and so we've had a chance to really look at it and see how it's worked with the overlap they have now.
and staff believes that it has been successful and that 6 additional units would not overly encumber the site or cause a problem in that area. We talked a little bit about some of the open space at the other meeting. Because they only have 19 total units, some of the requirements of open space set-asides don't kick in until you have 20 units. And that's something spelled out in an MDR zone. And even though that's kind of called out here, it triggers with the 20 units rather than with 19, so they're under that. They are adjacent to Timpanogos Elementary across the street, and then they're a block down from North Park. So there are nearby amenities for the client or for the residents in this neighborhood. Are there any questions or elaborate on any of these items? I'd be happy to do that.
Mr. Knick?
Yeah, so I noticed that due to the, I guess, unusual nature of the property and the circumstance, that the best way forward is using a pro zone.
Correct. We've looked at developing a mixed-use zone, but haven't been able to do that yet. The best tool we have right now, even though we sometimes are reluctant to use it, is a pro zone because it lets us mix those uses, mix the parking, do the things we want, and do it specific to a site rather than just a blanket allowance in other areas of the city.
Right, and so it's kind of almost a love-hate relationship with the pro zone. We don't like having so many of them, but each one of them has actually allowed a unique piece of property to develop when it wouldn't have developed any other way.
Correct, and I think we've used it about 3 or 4 times here in the last year or so.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Jones, can you help me with the clarification?
Yes, sir.
Item 10 and item 11 are related.
10's the text and
Yes.
12's the rezoning.
So 10 is putting into the code the text of the zone, which doesn't currently exist, and then item 11 would be applying the text to the property. So go ahead with your question, though.
And Mr. Harding expressed in an email that he would like to move this to the next council. Should we do item 10 and then move item 11, or do we move them both, or not?
I think that's probably a judgment call. In some ways, there's little point in, and Brian may disagree, but there's, as it currently stands, there's probably little point in passing 10 if it's not going to be applied to the property. But it is, a separate action, and I think Mr. Harding specifically was mentioning that he wanted further discussion of whether the zone should be applied to the property or not. So as far as I know, he didn't express any concerns with the proposed text of the zone. So it shouldn't hurt anything to go ahead and pass it. But on the other hand, it wouldn't hurt anything to delay it either. So I'm kind of ambivalent. I don't know if Brian has a preference.
I imagine you're speaking to me not in the third person, right? No, I don't think it would cause any problem if you're not going to rezone a property. You wouldn't need the ordinance until that same time, so it wouldn't matter one or the other.
Mr. Winterton, yeah.
I just think it's important. I see Mr. McLean and Mr. Nuttall here wondering about this. I think it'd be important for us to recognize that this is a rule of council, that if one, Mr. Van Buren, do you want to explain that just so people understand why we...
On these issues, when we're on the first hearing, the traditional policy is to have 2 public hearings. And although we can do it with 1 public hearing, but we've said if there's 1 council member, we don't have to have a vote and get a majority. If 1 council member wants to move this to the second hearing, we just automatically do that. Now, Mr. Harding is not here tonight, but he expressed an interest. This is in his neighborhood, in fact, on his very block, and he did that. And so then we had a discussion of, if he's not present, can he make that ruling? But then Mr. Stewart also mentioned that he would like to move it forward. And I'd forgotten that, George, so it automatically will anyway. So our question then is, do we just move both of these items? And Brian, you kind of felt like we just as well.
I think the conservative approach and perhaps the best approach would be to go ahead and move both of them, because although I don't foresee this happening and it wasn't mentioned in his message, it's entirely possible that if Mr. Harding or a member of the public if a few weeks from now expresses any concern about the application of the zone to the property, that application is based on something that the zone says. And so they may have a question about that particular thing.
Okay. But, well, Mr. Stewart.
I don't think there's any opposition to the proposal, but it's just that our chair wanted the neighborhood to have a chance to comment after tonight. So that's why I asked that it be delayed 2 weeks. So it's not a matter of being opposed at all.
And we still want to have a public hearing tonight. If for those who want to speak about this project, we'll still have that. State your name, please.
Karen Tapahi, Provo resident, but also working for the council. So I'm here in my official capacity, working with the neighborhoods. After the work meeting, I reached out to the neighborhood chair and one of the vice chairs to try to see if someone was coming tonight. They apparently have not been keeping up with the process of this application and were surprised we were already at this level and had hoped to get more time to look at it. And I just mentioned that I would bring that up. And so I think they will be happy to have a couple more weeks to just look it over. They had met on it when it originally was put in as an application, but that's been about a year ago. And so not that I want to hold up anybody, but I'm kind of relieved that we're going to have that other chance, and I will be pushing from my end to make sure that they get all the information they need to kind of review it and make sure it's still what they thought was coming to the neighborhood. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from the applicant. Dr. McLean, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer this young lady's question, we have had 2 neighborhood meetings probably almost a year ago. I kind of started this project about almost 2 years ago, and we ran into some problems with Brian trying to find out what zone would really fit and so on at the time. So the neighborhood chair, I had met with him, they say months ago. He was in favor of it. I have a letter from them on the second meeting, but very willing to let the neighborhood be involved even more so if they would like to. But nothing really has changed from the original proposal that we've made, and there's no reason to change anything at this point either. So everything that we presented at the neighborhood meetings is still the same. Nothing's really changed. But let me take you just a minute, and I'll just show you. This is the proposed building. This building is already there. I built that one 20 years ago. And what our intent is to build the duplicate of this building just behind this one, okay? And just as far as some pictures you can just see, here is the clinic itself. And then that building is just over here to the right. And then this is another picture of the building itself. And again, this building will be replicated just behind it. This picture is looking to the east, looking out to Fifth West. Excuse me, no, this is Fifth West, looking towards the back. And here's the building again here. And then this is looking the opposite direction, looking out towards Fifth West. And then this is the area where that building would be, looking from 4th North, where the building would be. Okay. Do you have any other particular questions? I've worked with Brian. He's been just very, very helpful to work with us all the way through on this. I think that one of the things that we are looking at is the property borders a mixture of multi-unit. It borders a professional office building to the south, and of course the school public facility to the north. And then just west of our property, I think it's an R16 zone, and that property is actually a duplex that runs out to 4th North. And then to the southwest, there is a townhouse complex called the Dixon Townhouse Complex, which also adjacents our property. So the usage around it are somewhat, I feel, compatible to what we're really doing at the time. So any other particular questions?
Yes, I understand, Dr. McLean, that you've put in some protections that should you sell your build your property, that there are protections in this pro zone that will prevent heavier use and parking restrictions. So that's in the zone itself.
It is in the zone, yeah, and we're very compatible and happy with that, yeah. Our practice has been there for 50 years. My dad initially started the practice. I came in and practiced with him for many years, and then my sons have now taken over or are involved with me. So it's an ongoing practice and will continue to be for many, many, many years. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any comments for the public that would like to address this issue? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council for any last discussion. If not, we will, this will be moved to the next meeting. What's the date of the next meeting? 12th. November 12th, we'll overhear this. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So we'll go to item 12. No, do we?
That's good.
So we skipped them both, right? That's, yeah, okay. Item 12, which is an ordinance amending the Provo City Code regarding Planning Commission approval of reductions in required parking, including for multifamily residential uses. And we'll hear this from Mr. Robert Mills, Provo City Planner.
Thank you. And I have to commend you all on moving so quickly through this agenda. Congratulations. That's fantastic. So as we talked about in work meeting today, item 12 is a request from the Housing Committee of the Provo City Council to look at an option to create a reduction in off-street parking requirements for multifamily residential uses. Currently in our code, there is, like we've discussed at length, there is an option to have parking reductions for other uses and also for multifamily that receives public support or financial assistance. But this particular amendment would allow multifamily residential uses to also seek a parking reduction, and that would be based on a transportation demand management program and a parking count justification study. Previously in our code, well, the way it is currently, uses like commercial, industrial, or public facilities can request a parking reduction through the conditional use permit process. That has a bit of detriment because conditional use permits are very hard to disallow. There has to be specific hazardous, there has to be proof that disallowing the conditional use permit would be hazardous to surrounding properties or people. And so the Planning Commission is very limited in their ability to condition those and to disallow them. So this would actually remove this as a conditional use permit and put it as part of the project plan approval process for all of these different types of uses. The proposed language requires that an applicant would submit a TDM program. Elements of that could include that the project site would be designed to allow additional landscaping instead of parking, but to hold that space in case that parking is required in the future. Robust bicycle amenities greater than what our code currently allows and requires. The proximity of a proposed project to employment centers, mass transit. So really talking about the context of the site and of the project itself. In addition to having a TDM program, an applicant would need to provide a parking justification study that would provide support for the proposed TDM measures of a specific project.
I want to just briefly explain that Councilmember Harding, who isn't here tonight, but in a previous meeting expressed a little bit of concern about that requirement for maybe projects that are on a smaller scale. We acknowledge those concerns. We realize that a parking justification study is an expense. However, we felt that the cost to benefit is so significant that, especially in a small project where a professional would just need to verify some TDM measures, we didn't feel that the cost of that would be so much that compared to the benefit of receiving a parking reduction, because parking is very expensive to provide. And so we felt that it would be important for the Planning Commission to have that justification. I want to point out just a couple more things, and then I'll be finished and ready for questions. Specifically, this is not an entitlement or something that is applied automatically. This would be a request that an individual applicant would have to make, and then it would be judged on the specific project. And then the Planning Commission has the ability to judge those individual projects on their own specific merits, on their specific context regarding location, design, all of those different types of elements. In the proposed language, there is what we refer to as a floor, so an absolute minimum that would be allowed, and that is in number E. This is 2G, where it says, in no case shall parking for residential uses be less than 1 space per unit for a 1-bedroom unit, or 1 1/2 spaces for a unit with 2 or more bedrooms. And like we talked about today, that doesn't mean that that's what the applicant is going to be given automatically. That's just the very minimum that the Planning Commission could reduce the parking standard to for that specific applicant. It could very well be more if there are more units, or if there are more bedrooms rather, or based on different contextual elements. But staff had the opportunity to take this to Planning Commission. Planning Commission felt that it was an important tool that they could use for evaluating different applications, and supported this project. And staff was able to feel like we could support this as well. One change that I want to make mention that Councilmember Connect brought up today as well. In the first paragraph in the purpose and intent, we have added language that would preclude any project with batching singles from receiving this type of reduction, but there was some discussion about whether that is necessary or whether that misses an opportunity that those specific projects might have. And so that would be up to the council. We would support either way. So that's all that I have, and I'm available for any questions.
Yeah, so about that, I mentioned the Amanda Knight Hall as an example. I'm just curious, what was the logic in putting that there when, I can understand that maybe single rental, student rental in particular, maybe run a higher risk of too many cars and not insufficient parking and so on. I get that, but I don't see any reason why, given the flexibility that you've already indicated that gives us enough oversight to make sure that nothing squeaks through that really shouldn't, why we wouldn't want to allow for the possibility that an Amanda Knight Hall is right next to a UVX station. They have ample, as you put it, robust biking amenities, and they maybe even have a program that is incentivizing not using a car. Anyway, that seems like it should fit within this, and I'm just wondering if you have any reservations, or if the discussion on the Planning Commission or with others, what was the reasoning there that would give any pause to considering the batching arrangement.
So those are excellent points, and I appreciate you bringing those up. It was mostly a conservative effort on the part of staff, that those specific projects historically have been difficult to enforce and create the larger number of concerns, especially related to parking in neighborhoods. And so it was a conservative effort on the part of staff to put that language in there to limit those. But again, if that's the council's prerogative to change that, we would support that.
I mean, I think the reasoning I would use to argue why it should be there. I'm trying to figure out how to describe it. Why batching single residential projects should be included in this ordinance is because a lot of them presumably might be near higher density areas where public transportation is more accessible. I mean, we've got several projects in the wings where this would potentially apply, and I don't like the idea of giving anybody, sort of a free pass, obviously, but this ordinance doesn't do that.
Correct.
But I would like to, I would imagine that a lot of those kinds of projects would be good candidates, or they might be able to make a good case anyway. And if we were just saying, well, we don't even want to entertain it, that just doesn't seem fruitful. So that would be my argument to us in thinking about including it.
You mentioned, as we look at the oversight, you mentioned the possibilities. Are there any requirements, or is it basically up to the Planning Commission? They will have input from CRC and the design review and potentially TMAC,
Correct.
But they are not required to go through those particular, a project would have to go through design review and the CRC committee.
Correct. So it has to go through the CRC process as well as the design review process. And that was one of the impetus for requiring a parking justification study on all of these projects, is that allows our own city staff to review and to make comments on their findings, and whether city staff would actually agree with the findings that the applicant's engineers have come up with to support that, rather than just creating a TDM program that would sound good and would be enforceable, but then it's also backed by that specific engineering requirement that our engineers can then review and either agree or make comments that would need to be improved.
And all those will be going to Planning Commission for their review.
And then again, just to reiterate, this is not something that the Planning Commission automatically has to approve. The findings may be that that parking reduction is not justified, and they could definitely make those findings and arrive at that determination.
Mr. Knick.
So I echo George's comments, and I understand. A lot of what we do is based on history, and there's a lot of history here. And so I understand you're trying to be conservative on something that has created a lot of problems in the past and maybe been difficult to enforce. We may well have more projects in what used to be called the SCAMP area, south of campus. And if we do a parking permit program in that area, which has been talked about for many, many years, but if it finally happens, then anyone coming in with a new project cannot automatically rely on the street as overflow-free parking. They will have to take seriously what kind of ratio is appropriate for parking, or they will end up having a problem filling units because they haven't made the right match.
Correct.
With supplying the right amount of parking. So another question I have is, earlier we talked about at the end of the parking requirements, it does give the details of a nonprofit and what they're required to do and how they can get a reduction. So I don't believe we're changing that language, are we?
That's correct.
And the current language doesn't necessarily ask them for a parking justification study or a TDM plan.
Correct.
So what I would suggest, whenever it's convenient, is that we either add language to what's there existing, or just simply remove that and bring that language into this ordinance so that it's all in one package and everyone plays by the same rules.
I think that's great advice. I think that's a great suggestion.
Okay.
This item is open to public discussion. If there's anyone that'd like to comment regarding it.
Sharon Mehmet, I'm in the Edgemont neighborhood, and I have commented already a couple of times in Planning Commission on this. And I apologize, I did not get time with my own work today to look at the details or listen to your work session on what was discussed and what changes may have been made. But my comments in Planning Commission, I'll reiterate them here because they felt serious to me. I appreciate them adding at Planning Commission the floor, the minimum parking that Planning Commission could change this to. But what I saw, and again, I apologize, I don't even have my notes with me, that there was a list of things that the applicant would be required to, were suggested that they could include in their plan as part of their transportation study. Thank you. Sorry, give me just a second. And it was the first one, I think, unless you've made changes to it, that they had to show a design site of landscaped areas, and that this was a program that they may include, but they weren't required to include. That okay, if we can't, thanks for the reduction, and if there's problems, darn, we built a building there. Because I don't see in the future Provo City or even the neighbors having the will to ask them to tear down a building to require more parking. So I would ask that you change in CI to that first item that they have to, that it's not a may include in their plans, that they will include in their plans, that they have to show this is landscaping, and if after the 5 years you've shown you don't need this, great, and you can do what you want with that landscaping then. Instead of us needing to ask you to tear down a building, we're just asking you to pave over some landscaping to get some more parking so that we don't run into a startup situation. That was my largest concern about this, was that it's a may, and if they decide in their plan to put a building there, then we aren't really going to ask them to tear down part of their project to fix this. And so if that's done at the front of the project, I think this could be, I'm a little nervous. I know Mr. Pepperoni made comment in planning about, I think you're asking for a lot more work for staff because you're going to get a lot of application for this, because why wouldn't somebody apply for this? And he did also mention one project where they weren't sure what was going on, but some of the parking was empty, but it could be because they were charging for the second spot and everybody was parking on the street around. And there's not a good way to make that judgment call, I guess, but thanks. Thanks, Robert.
Paul Evans, live in the Pleasant View neighborhood. The opportunity to modify parking for unique situations is an incredibly powerful tool, and it gives flexibility, I think, for the city to fill in and do some interesting interesting developments going forward. The power of that tool, though, also represents something significantly different than we've done as a city ever in terms of, reducing parking that way. And a suggestion I would have was, can we put in a 2 or 3 year sunset or automatic requirement to review what's happened? And then that way we can say, look, it's working the way we want it to, or it's not. And then we have, this built-in mechanism to have that review rather than go through some really difficult processes otherwise. I think that'd do a lot to reduce the concern that many people have about the impact that this will have, whether it's permanent or we can review it sometime in the near future. So after we've had some feedback on how it's working. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Any other discussion from the public? We'll come back to the council for discussion. Mr. Stewart.
Paul, thank you for rekindling my concerns. I want to put this off for 2 weeks.
Okay, according to council rules, we'll move this to the next meeting. Is that right, George? 2 weeks, next meeting? Okay. George.
I'm just wondering if Mr. Pepperoni could address the question. It does give me some pause to, at least in my earlier suggestion, that we would include batching apartments as a part of this. Does that create a burden that is way too onerous? Because everyone would be trying?
No, I was actually one of the staff members who spoke most with the strongest opinion about not letting this apply to the batching single situation, because we've gone through so much blood, sweat, and tears to get to the current ratio we have in those projects in that area where it applies. To now open the door to reductions on that, while I agree they're in more walkable locations, they may be closer to the what's the new BRT? UVX. I'm sorry. They may be closer to the UVX. But we've just gone through so many years of problems that we've tried to address through new ratios, new standards, and resurveys. And many more than one time have we sent staff out at 2, 3, 4 o'clock 3 or 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning to count cars in these projects to try to get that ratio correct. And I would just be very hesitant to give away a reduction.
Do you, so what would, I can be persuaded. I've just thought that it was in our interest as well to provide that flexibility for these larger scale projects. Are there other ways to provide that flexibility that don't involve putting batching apartments into this ordinance? I'm thinking of those larger projects that are near Front Runner and near downtown or whatever. That
similar mechanism that I think has been used for a while, for years, the Pro Zone option. That's the biggest reasons for the Pro Zone were setbacks and parking ratios. When the Pro Zones were really going to house students around campus, those are the biggest differences in the zones.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Knack.
Yeah, that is very helpful. So earlier, Sharon brought up that it is kind of optional. They could put some property aside, and if they don't, what are the things that they could do in lieu of setting aside property that would give us the same assurance that setting aside property would do? Because she's saying, well, just why not make it mandatory?
Right. And that is a really good question. And from a site design perspective, oftentimes it is not feasible to have additional space on your site that could be just held in perpetuity. for parking. And so then it becomes incumbent upon the applicant to prove that there are a list of other things, and it's by no means conclusive or exhaustive. We wanted to leave room for innovation, for future technology and development that could be incorporated into different types of projects that would allow them to utilize whatever is available to them to reduce their parking, but then to have that justification study that says, as engineers, we've looked at this, and the things that they're proposing, in our best judgment, seems like that will work for the type of parking reduction that they are asking for. If they do choose to utilize, parking, if projects do have that luxury of having some extra space that they could landscape and leave in landscaping, but could possibly convert that to parking in the future, that might be a good reason to justify maybe going to the lower minimum that they've requested. And if they don't have those types of elements, maybe we need to look at, and maybe the Planning Commission can then consider a different ratio or things like that. So that's why we didn't want to make it a mandatory requirement, because we felt that the availability of that specific measure might not be there very often. In some cases, yes, and they can take advantage of that. But I think for the majority of projects, that might be an unattainable measure.
Okay, that's a great explanation. What about, right now, it seems like we have a 5-year review kind of built in.
Yeah, so currently they would have to, as part of their transportation demand management program, the applicant would enter into an agreement with the city that would be recorded against the property. And I think that monitoring would be an excellent thing to put in there. But currently, in our proposed language at the request of Mr. Harding, there's a sunset clause that says after a period of 5 years, during which time the number of parking stalls has never been found to be inadequate, the Development Services Director may determine that the retaining landscaped areas in reserve for future parking is no longer necessary. So the applicant could then come back to the city, to the Development Services Director after that 5-year interim and say, we've never had a problem, we've never had any occurrences where there's a parking problem, so can we utilize this area in a different way? So.
And, the idea that we come back at some point, whether it's 5 years or in 2 or 3 years, really, as a matter of course, should apply to any projects that we are approving. We should kind of, if not review them all, review ones that maybe have complaints, or we need to know if what we're doing is working. So with that said, I appreciate Bill pointing out that we probably should be conservative when it comes to the batching singles. And so I'm okay with that language remaining in the ordinance. And and like you say, if they can justify it through a pro zone, they have that avenue. There's other ways they can get a reduction, but they actually have to prove it. And it's a very high level of proof, and it's an actual rezone. It has to come all the way to the council, and it doesn't stop at the Planning Commission. So I think that would give us a greater level of assurance that if there was something, it would pass muster.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Williams.
I have a question about having a sunset clause in the ordinance itself. I know that we have had some sunset clauses. For example, with the Utility Transportation Fund, we had a required hearing with the council to see how it was working. Do you see us needing to have that hearing, or do you think that the experience of what we will experience will, if we have a problem, then we deal with it? Or do we have to put something in the zone to make sure that we look at it?
well, it's going to be Mr. Pepperoni dealing with this, but my observation in that is that if there is a problem, it's going to be coming through zoning enforcement initially. There are going to be complaints that are filed, and so there will probably be an established history on whether or not that particular project is functioning well or functioning not so well. And so my take on it is that the professional experience of those people that are administering this would probably be able to make that determination, but I would defer
Whether
to
we
the
need to
Development
change
Services
the
Director.
ordinance or not.
You mean regarding the 5-year sunset?
Yeah.
Right. So within 2 or 3 years of a project being
No, with regard to a potential 3-year review of the whole ordinance, not on the particular piece of property.
Mr. Evans' point, I don't know if you heard that.
well, within a couple of years of the project being built, we'll start, once it's been occupied for a couple of years, we're going to be receiving complaints if the parking is inadequate. So we would go out and start doing, we'd look into it and try to figure out what the problem is and what corrective measures could be taken. As far as there be an automatic review, we can do that. We'd have to put something in the file that would throw a flag up in 3 years so we don't overlook it. We could do something like that. Because there's a 5-year review and we're going to look into it as soon as we start receiving complaints, I'm not sure it's really needed.
And that's what I'm wondering. It's not a review of specific projects. It's a review of the whole ordinance. And I think personally, I think as we experience the ordinance, we will know.
Right.
Mr. Stewart?
What bothers me about the ordinance is at the federal level, we've seen the elected representatives give so much authority to the administrative area of government and not take the responsibility to review, maybe for convenience or ease of operation, I don't know. I just hate to see we as elected representatives give this kind of power to a non-elected organization, group. It just kind of reminds me of what's happened at the federal level. So that's why if there was some means, to review individual cases where the Planning Commission said they wanted to do this and not have it reviewed again by the council, just it's bothersome to me anyway. That's my concern.
Mr. Connect?
I understand what George is saying. I had a former council member call me up with the same concerns, and I said, well, it's very specific. It's not like we're giving a carte blanche to the Planning Commission. It has to have studies, and I believe staff is going to weigh in on those studies and say they're valid or not and give their opinion. And there are basic minimums here. There's a fail-safe mechanism, so it's not like we can go below a certain preset level. And if it isn't working, we can make adjustments, we can repeal it. It's not like we're giving away power permanently. We are delegating, I think, in a responsible manner. I trust our Planning Commission and staff, and I'm willing to try this. And realizing that, we can always take it back or amend it.
Mr. Stewart?
I guess my answer to that is why not bring it back to the council? What is the problem with the council reviewing something as important as parking? It's been such an issue in the city. I don't think there's any other issue that's been more prevalent over the years that I've been in government than parking. And so why abdicate this responsibility to the Planning Commission why not the council take it up if there's a desire to lower the parking ratio?
Good question.
Just for clarification, Mr. Stewart, you're talking about the whole ordinance. You're not talking about a review. You're talking about each. Instead of the planning commission making this decision, that the council make this decision. Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I felt like there might have been a comment coming from Mr. Jones, and if there wasn't, I was going to ask for his opinion on the idea. I mean, because it does seem like a bit of an administrative
It is. That's the thing that I'm struggling with, is from a separation of powers perspective. You know, in a city with a different form of government than ours, that it's not unusual for the city council to do some of the things that planning commissions do in other cities, because they are ultimately the land use authority. But in our particular form of government, it would be, I think, a little bit odd for the commission, I mean, for the council, even in its statutory role as the ultimate land use authority, to be making decisions that are non-legislative in nature, which this appears to be. You know, it's one thing if someone comes and with a pro-zone or a proposed text amendment to change the parking for their particular piece of property according to the zoning on that property. That's definitely a legislative function. But having the council designate itself as the body that reviews an administrative land use decision seems somewhat unusual to me. I can't say that you can't do it. I'd have to go do some research on that. But that was why I was making the face that led to you calling me out, as I was wondering about the possibility of doing that.
Well, thank you, Brian. And would you agree that, you know, we're putting parameters here? It's not a carte blanche, and if we don't like the results, we can change the parameters or pull it back and do whatever we want.
Right, and that is the more, I think, normal in our form of government standard for doing things like this, is you either make the decision in the ordinance itself, or you establish criteria in the ordinance which the administrative branch then uses for making their decisions.
Comment?
Yes.
It's harder to get the horse back in the barn once it's out.
Mr. Sewell?
I had a question for Mr. Pepperoni. There was some reference made to the additional amount of work that this ordinance would create for staff, and I was just wondering what your perspective is on kind of the trade-offs, the benefits you see from the ordinance versus the extra work that it would create for staff. Do you see that as a good trade-off?
Yes, I think that's fine, but is that the trade-off that was meant, or was the trade-off?
I think the trade-off of this is going to be a common occurrence that people are going to ask for this, and that's going to create.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, most applications, I think, will come in and ask for some type of reduction because of the simple economics of the cost of providing parking. I don't think it would be burdensome on staff, because it's going to be part of the project plan approval process anyway. It would overlap that.
So if we keep the ordinance the way it's written, which excludes student or batching, would you support it? I mean, that particular clause, I know you feel good about, but overall,
they'd be excluded. Batching signals be excluded.
Yeah, so the way it's written right now, that would exclude them. And so without making any changes to the ordinance, would you support the ordinance that is before us?
Yes.
Yeah. So it wouldn't necessarily be a burden, but it could be a problem, as you said, if we did include the batching singles in the mix.
Yes.
Great.
Other comments or discussion? It seems like early on, one of the council members George, did you move this to our next meeting? So we appreciate the discussion. We will have another public hearing at our next council meeting on this subject. Thank you. After 2 innings, it was 1-2 for Houston, but I don't know what it is currently, so any of those are concerned. Oh, I was supposed to tell you to close your ears first. So. He's recording it. Shh, shh. That's all. The next item is an ordinance amending the general plan designation of approximately 1.34 acres of real property generally located at 1900 North Canyon Road from commercial to residential in the Pleasant View neighborhood. Now, Brian, I have another question. Well, we have 2 of these items. Should we read them both together or do them
I think it's
separate?
appropriate to read them both into the meeting at this time and take public comment on both of them at the same time. They'll just need to be voted on separately.
Okay. So that's item 1. And then the other item is an ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 1.34 acres of real property generally located at 1900 North Canyon Road from public facilities to campus mixed use. And Robert Mills will be presenting this also.
Thank you very much. So the last time that we met on these 2 items, Councilmember Stewart requested that that we work through a development agreement with the applicant. It seems as though that has happened, but I will let the developer and Mr. Evans, the neighborhood chair, continue to comment on that as well. But to update you, one of the concerns was this project, the height of this project, and being specifically limited in the development agreement. And the language that has been reached specifically limits the height of the roof. Well, it calls out the building as a 4-story building with a basement, and then allows for the top of the roof to not exceed 56 feet in height, with one structural element that could exceed that height at the southwest corner for architectural purposes. But again, I will let the applicant and the neighborhood chair provide additional information on that. The 2 items before you this evening are a general plan amendment request and a rezone request to allow a 121 one-bedroom unit apartment building at the corner of Stadium Avenue and Canyon Road. We have, as staff, we were able to review these 2 items and felt that it was consistent with both the general plan and the proposed uses for the site. We felt that it was consistent with the neighborhood, especially given the amount of really good civil discourse that has gone on between the neighborhood and the applicant to get it to this point. We took both of these items to Planning Commission. Planning Commission supported both of the items and recommended approval. And this is where we find ourselves tonight with these 2 items, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Mr. Winterson.
Height is always an issue. 56 feet from where? You know, I know this slopes down, and how does that work? From any point?
From grade.
From grade. So any point on that grade, it will not be higher than 56 feet, or?
Correct.
Okay.
And I would mention that this particular zone, the campus mixed-use zone, traditionally allows for a height of 75 feet. So, but I will, again, defer specifics to the applicant for those questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll ask the applicant, Dave Hunter, to come up.
Hi, my name is Dave Hunter, and I apologize for wearing a down coat in chambers, but I'm freezing, and it's freezing outside, so it is no sign of disrespect. It's just because I'm frozen. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody again for showing up, especially Bill Pepperoni from staff and Robert and the neighborhood chair, Paul Evans, and his co-chairs. We've been working very closely for several months getting to the point where we're at tonight. As of a few hours ago, the neighborhood chair and us and the city, we've all come to a consensus on what the development agreement is going to stay. And we actually came in and signed and notarized a copy of it this morning, and it's changed a little bit since then. So if it passes, we actually have the language tonight, which we will agree to, and what the neighborhood chair has agreed to and what the staff is comfortable with. So we have that language and it's ready to go. So we'll throw the development agreement away that we signed today and re-sign another one tomorrow. With that being said, we really do appreciate what the city is doing to expedite the development process where we don't have to go spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to a yes or no. I know that it's the mayor and Bill that are kind of spearheading that program. And it's not a problem, but one of the issues that arises with the program is that there are a couple issues that during the planning, when we go to actual construction docs, issues arise that we work through, and that's in every project, even back in the old program, and we had to go really far down with plans to get something approved. There were still issues that you had to resolve going through construction docs. And the last two little issues that we have is the sidewalk, and it's not an issue with us. We want to put right now the Public Works wants the sidewalk inside of the curb. We want the curb a buffer, then the sidewalk. It doesn't fit with this plan. It doesn't fit with the neighborhood. Game day, we assume that if we have this sidewalk with a buffer between the curb and the sidewalk, that'll just get trampled every single game. We are not the ones opposing putting the sidewalk out to the street. We want the sidewalk out to the street. Bill has committed that he will help us get that through Public Works. Paul Evans, I know he wants it out there. The city or the neighborhood wants it out to the outside. So that is one of the issues we're working through. And we have a mail room right now contemplated. We don't know exactly where it's going to go or how we're going to get the mail in and out, but that's also one of the issues that we're going to have to work through when we go to construction docs. And again, we're capitalists, and we know that if kids can't get mail and packages delivered, they won't live in our project. So we are very motivated to making sure kids will get their mail and their packages delivered in a safe way. With that being said, we have spent months of compromising and getting to the place where we are right now. And in any good compromise, everybody walks away a little dissatisfied. I know that the neighborhood doesn't, they are pretty much on board now, but they feel like there could have been a little bit more here or there. We as developers wish we could have done a couple things, but I think we've all come to a very congenial compromise where I think everybody is satisfied to this point. And it's not everything that the neighborhood wanted, it's not everything that we wanted, but I think we've arrived at a conclusion that is satisfactory to everyone. And I don't know what else to say. We think it's a great looking project, and I think it's going to solve some of the very, very pressing issues that Provo has with married student housing. And I know it's not going to be the do-all, end-all, but it will take a dent out of the problem. Any questions?
Just out of curiosity, sizes, are they all single bedroom or are they
all
double
one bedroom?
All one bedroom.
They're 685 feet, so approximately 700 feet. And I think we already had this at our last council meeting, but we had we had less than the parking standard, and we were actually going to use the parking that was getting pushed through, but we've actually rearranged everything, and we have 1.5 parking spaces per unit, so we're not going through any exception. We got to the standard. Yeah, and it came up, how are we gonna mandate that it's married? We can't, federally we can't, but we assume that one bedroom apartments, it's not gonna be batching singles, it will be, we're building it specifically for married student housing.
Comment?
George.
I just would like to thank you as a developer. This is one of the better examples I've seen in my years in government of the neighborhood working with the developer congenially, So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
And,
all in the neighborhood also.
and Mr. Stewart, it did not start out, it didn't start out great, but over 4 months we've become, I think we at least respect each other at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. If there are no other questions, we'll ask the neighborhood chair, Mr. Paul Evans, to come up.
Paul Evans, Chair for the Pleasant View neighborhood. Indeed, this has been an incredible journey, and like most journeys, there's days that you have good food and days that you have bad food, and so today's a good food day. So indeed, the overarching effort for the neighborhood has been always, what is the neighborhood going to look like in 10 years and 20 years? And the general plan helps define that and lists the types of zones and high density zones that are envisioned for the neighborhood. The highest density zone envisioned for the neighborhood is R4, which has a height maximum of 55 feet, and then it has some density of about 30 or 40. But in this case, we're dealing with a development that has 1-bedroom units. So if you compare units to a batching singles sort of unit where you might have 3 or 4 bedrooms, it doesn't match exactly, but it's about in the same ballpark. And so that's always what we've been working for, is to say we have a general plan, we kind of have envisioned what the neighborhood is going to look like in the future, and this project as currently proposed meets that overall vision at 56 feet. I put a red X on the corner of Stadium and Canyon Road, and I'm going to be measuring it from there. So no, that's not true. So anyway, in case you're worrying about where to measure that from. So it really has been a good process where the parking's been taken care of, the height's been taken care of, and and that's in the development agreement. Dave mentioned the issue of where the many 121 couples or people or whatever, they're going to be ordering online. They'll be getting delivery from FedEx, UPS, USPS. I mean, everywhere. In fact, maybe we got to consider putting a landing pad for a drone on the roof. But anyway, so that's going to be a concern going forward. And also the issue of the landscaping. It's always been with the idea, and if you look at the BYU Stadium, if you look at every development, including the Stadium Avenue project that Public Works just finished a year and a half ago, we have a curb, we have a sidewalk, and then we have the landscaping. What that does is allow for a robust, or at least a larger amount of landscaping that is unimpeded in terms of providing a buffer between the street and the building. And one of the problems that we have tonight is that the site plan that is attached to the development agreement shows a landscape strip rather than the sidewalk next to the curb. And so I'd request that the council make note of that and just say, look, you need to put that sidewalk next to the curb. And even when I've tried to uncover how the coordinator review committee functions within the city, to get minutes, figure out who's saying what, it's not recorded anywhere. I mean, at least with this issue of the sidewalk. This is an issue that's come up, but it's not anywhere in any CRC documents. And so I go, well, how does the public ever get involved in the CRC process, which has a dramatic impact on what the project's going to look like if we can't ever know when they're meeting, what the agenda is, and stuff like that. But that's a separate issue that will be addressed. But we do need to get that sidewalk issue taken care of. So again, thank you to staff and to everybody else who's been involved. It's been a good process. So any questions?
Just out of curiosity, how wide is that park strip that they're talking? That's in there now?
It's usually 2 feet.
That, to me, I support getting that sidewalk all the way over. 2-foot strips are very hard to maintain. Water, whatever it is, they're just hard.
Or even if it's a 3-foot strip.
One of the 5 to 10 you need, I think, to make it look good. So
You just go drive through there. There is nowhere else within 200 yards. In fact, it's 400 yards in most places before there's anything that ever shows a planting strip anywhere, and it's usually on a side street. But not along Canyon, not along Stadium, not in front of the stadium, not by the apartment complexes are there. They all have the sidewalk next to the curb, and then you get a larger landscaping buffer that's unimpeded.
Okay. Paul, maybe if you lead us in Kumbaya, that'll soften the Public Works Department.
I don't know, Warner, what was the song that you suggested?
Solidarity forever in protest.
Okay, Solidarity Forever in Protest, or something like that. We were going to stand up in the back and sing and dance that, but we decided not to abuse you. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. This is open for public discussion, so anyone else?
Council, you've had a very busy, full day. My name is Marion Monahan, Chair of the Edgemont Neighborhood. So in the interest of saving you time, Sharon and I have prepared a statement which she is going to read concerning how we feel about this project. We realize our neighborhood is not this neighborhood, but we have real concerns about this very high density moving into residential areas. Canyon Road is a collector road, and we hope this does not set a precedent for moving up much more housing like this along the neighborhoods to the north.
Thank you for your time. I'm Sharon Memmott. I wanted to address a couple things before we get to our statement. The comments being made about sidewalks, I'm personally more concerned about the setback of the building, not, and with visions of, I will bring up 9th East and 700 North. We don't want this to come right out to the road. And that kind of comes to the CMU zone, which we wanted to discuss, because the lot coverage versus green space is different in the CMU zone. Provo City has another campus zone, which they could have used, and we don't understand why they didn't. I respectfully disagree with Mr. Evans about if this were 3-bedroom units, we'd still be at 40 units for this site, which would be close to 30 units per acre, which is still larger than the project you discussed earlier in South Provo per units for density. So those are my comments directed at what's been discussed. We appreciate the council and staff and their hard work and depend and trust that council and staff has our best interest at heart when making decisions about Provo City. Our real concern is about how changing the zone in this area, which is pointed out in the staff report, is currently surrounded by different residential zones, to something as large and unlimited in scope as CMU, especially as you consider on the same night as you discuss on the same night reducing requirements in parking, which would have had some mechanism for limiting the number of units, that may unintentionally cause future councils and staff to believe that the plan was to continue in this extreme high density use for this area and others nearby to the BYU properties. I could name, as we go up Canyon Road, as Marion said, we've got the soccer fields, and building something adjacent to campus would then be in our neighborhood, because the playing fields on Canyon Road would then be adjacent to campus. What is the mechanism for keeping this zone within a range of the core of campus? Setting parameters on the use of the CMU zone from the core of campus in future developments rather than continuing to spread along collector roads into established single-family neighborhoods. While we expect change to come, we feel we should also be able to expect Provo City will protect our investment in choosing these single-family neighborhoods in which to live. Neighborhoods and developers should always work together and compromise to make a project the best that it can be for the developer, the neighborhood, and therefore Provo City. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Good evening. My name is Warner Woodworth. Taught MBAs for 40 years at BYU. And I started living in Provo in 1960. Came back with my PhD from Michigan. Lived in the same house ever since, just up the street from the credit union. Raised 10 kids, had 5 others from Brazil and back east live with us going to college. And my wife and I have loved this neighborhood because it was peaceful, quiet, sweet, not commercial, not crowded, not polluted, not crazy. And it looks to me like this is a fait accompli, so I'm just going to share the perspective of the small group apparently now that still resists this. When we had our first meeting, there were about 100 people. They were mad, they were angry. We were over at the Rock Canyon School. People were extremely upset. There was a lot of yelling. There were accusations, there were a lot of defensiveness, there were a lot of mistruths, a lot of promises that were going to happen that we're still looking for. But it's, you know, I got 3 emails today. I just got back from speaking in New York, and people said, well, I'm not going to bother coming. It's a done deal. We got realtors in the Planning Commission and developers in the Planning Commission, maybe the City Council. I don't know. They did the homework. I didn't. I know several of you for many years. But for us, this was a little Garden of Eden in Pleasant View. It was sweet. It was quiet. It was peaceful. We raised our kids, and all our neighbors had kids, and we'd have neighborhood games out and stuff. We didn't have to worry a lot about traffic, about congestion, about lots of strangers coming through the area that are only here for a year or two and then taking off, going someplace else. And it was a sweet life. And we've also had big development projects before, but they were all rejected by the City Council and the Planning Commission. We had one of the more recent large ones was David Hall, hoping to put up a Korahor, a Babylon structure with 20,000 people in our very neighborhood, and started buying up homes, getting ready to gut them all to put up this big structure. And people were mobilized and against it and complained and fought, and I think he's kind of backed off on that. Some years back, Devin Durant and his family wanted to buy, they own that mountain, let's call it the mountain, the hill up behind the credit union. They wanted to put a huge skyscraper up there so we couldn't see the valley, couldn't see the lake, couldn't see the sunsets. And it took a long time to fight against that. But I think it's pretty well subsided. But once this gets approved, then these guys will all be back with theirs. The mayor, George, his neighbor up the end of the same street, up the block from the credit union, up on 9th East and Stadium, wanted to put up, I think it was a 4-story, maybe it was a 6-story big apartment building there, Harold Goodman. And, you know, we banded together and resisted that, and that finally died. But it looks like this is going to happen. As an environmentalist, I like peaceful, quiet communities. I like healthy environments. I like places where kids can run without being worried, without the parents worrying about the surrounding environment. And so I see this as a bit of a contradiction to the quiet life in our little Zion, if I can use that expression, of the past. I don't want the cars, I don't want the speed, I don't want the strangers, I don't want the pollution, especially, this is not a NIMBY thing. This is a thing where we know there's plenty of places in Provo where structures like this can exist. For example, downtown, right next to the new credit union. And we've been a member of that credit union since it was in the Wilkinson Center. And, you know, we know that there's a lot of issues. A lot of people have talked to me since that first time we met saying, well, the city council and the mayor's office, all they're concerned about is money. They don't have the guts to raise our taxes. And I've always said, we should raise our taxes. We should all be paying more. We all pay way too little. And there's this philosophy, well, we should be able to get something for nothing. That's not what my religion teaches. My religion teaches you pay as you go. We should all be better, more responsible citizens, giving of our resources to have better schools for our kids, have quieter streets, have more beautiful parks, have concerts in the community and so forth. So I guess I'm here to just register the concerns and the disappointment and the sorrow that a number of people feel seeing this thing as somewhat of an inevitable reality. We'd like to have a better quality of life. We'd like to keep our communities sweet and loving the way it used to be. So with that perspective, I just want to conclude saying I'm pretty sure that if Silverado, Dave and these guys, if they went up in the middle of Oak Hills and said, let's put up our structure up here, or if they were to go to Indian Hills or other parts of our community where richer people live, homes are a little bigger, a little nicer, they couldn't get that rammy-umptum put up there. They're only going to be able to build it down here in our neighborhood, next to the stadium, which we also resisted for 17 years. And it's okay. We finally accepted that. And I've heard the Silverado folks say, well, it's just like the stadium. Stadium has 60, 70,000 people show up to a game. Yeah, 6 days a year. We can handle 6 days a year. But to handle this crowd in this facility, it's a great disappointment to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments? We'll close the public discussion. Any other discussion or comments from council members? Mr. Sewell? Mr. Connect?
So we've heard from several people tonight on how the decisions we make affect their quality of life and how they're not happy with us or our decisions. And, you know, if people think we make these decisions and just go home and brush it off, I do lose sleep over this stuff. Mm-hmm. I think about it. It bothers me. It's like, is there any other way? But I don't know how to freeze time and make it so that we don't grow up or we stop growing. And where's that growth going to be? And where does it make the most sense? And today, this makes sense. So other than the sidewalk issue, I'll be voting for this. And regarding that, you know, Benoist Park, that kind of bothers me because I do take commitments that we make to the public very seriously. But I look at the whole picture and how it turned out, and I'm going, I'm not sure how we could have retained a little pocket park. You know, if that's not what the Parks Department wanted to do, and so, you know, you just can't always do what I guess some people might say is the right thing. And if the right thing was that, you know, you never go, change that park to anything else, then yeah. So it bothers me. But even so, we go forward and we make the best decisions and consider everything. And I know you all do the same. You consider everything. It's not easy. And some people say, what are you going to do when you get off the council? I'm going to go, I'm going to enjoy life a little bit more, because it is stressful. Anyone that gets on here and takes it seriously, it affects our quality of life as we struggle to protect and promote the quality of life of the neighborhoods and the city.
Mr. Sewell.
So I have two questions and then a comment. First question has to do with the development agreement. I understand there's been an updated agreement today. Do we have a copy of that so we kind of know what we're voting on, or what how does the current motion read in regard to that?
Are you pulling that up, Bryce? We do have an updated version that Robert Mills sent out an hour or so ago. I think they're working on getting that up. The short version is that it's still, so if you can go down to paragraph 4, I'll skip the short version and just show you what it says now that it's up. Okay, so 4A and B, these are the two requirements. Project height shall not exceed 56 feet, a 4-story building with a basement, excluding an architectural element to be included only on the southwest corner. Project would be built according to the attached site plan. Density shall not exceed 121 one-bedroom units. With regard to paragraph A, that is actually the language that Mr. Evans suggested in response to reviewing the language submitted by the developer. And the developer communicated back and said that language was acceptable to them. And so that's what's currently in the development agreement.
Thank you. Then my second question was about the sidewalk. It sounded to me like both the neighborhood and the developer preferred that the sidewalk go to the curb,
And staff also.
And
It's a public works issue, but staff, neighborhood, and us, we're all on the same side of the fence.
so is there something we need to do to facilitate that, or what? It sounded like there was maybe that's not the default way it would normally happen, or...
Well, and I don't know if we need Bill or Robert or someone else to weigh in as far as what Public Works is expecting. So, from a legal perspective, my concern is I don't think that the development agreement can change established standards. So I don't know if if it's already an established standard somewhere that it must be that the strip has to be there. I don't know the answer to that question.
I will do my best.
Okay.
So just to clarify, the proposed park strip is 7 feet wide. Then there's a 6-foot sidewalk, and then the building will be set back an additional 10 feet from that. The main problem with the combo sidewalk, the curb combo sidewalk, is that there are existing power lines that currently run through there, and relocating those to allow for the curb combo sidewalk will be very, very expensive, to my knowledge. And I don't think that's something that the developer wants to incur. So
going back to the question, from my perspective, the most efficient solution to the question, if the council is satisfied with this and willing to defer it to the administration, is that the current ordinance, as with most of our development agreement ordinances, authorizes the mayor to negotiate and execute a development agreement consistent with the representations made in the meeting. So it's not, in my mind, it's not the text of the development agreement that needs to change, it's the site plan that's attached as an exhibit to the development agreement. So if it's possible to get that site plan changed and approved by the city to be the way that everybody is proposing it, then the most efficient solution is for the council to go ahead and change the general plan, change the zone map application, authorizing a development agreement, and for the city administration to work through the process of getting the site plan exhibit updated to match what everybody's looking for before the mayor signs the development agreement.
correct. So if the opportunity arises that the curb combo sidewalk could be implemented, then we could just switch that page out in the site plan portion of it, and then the mayor would be able to execute it.
The question, of course, implied by Robert's statement is, what if existing codified standards do not allow that to happen? And if that's the case, then I think there is no recourse but to go change those codified standards, which is going to require, text amendments or planning commission review of public works engineering standards.
To my understanding, I think both sidewalk situations and scenarios designs are acceptable. The one is preferred, obviously, but in this case specifically, because of the power line issue, it seemed to work better. But again, the project is still going through the CRC process and will continue to be reviewed. If the council so chooses to rezone the project, then the applicant has the opportunity to then go actually do engineer drawings, submit those for additional review to actually get a more verified site plan, and this process will go on.
And then, so to follow up with that, I would just say, so I presented that as the most efficient method of resolving the issue. If the council's approval of the rezone is contingent upon there being a development agreement that has a site plan attached as an exhibit that puts the sidewalk next to the curb, then I think your two options are to either not approve the rezone until that's the draft of the development agreement that you see in front of you, or indicate that that is your intent to the mayor and ask her, which wouldn't be legally binding, but if your relationship is trusting enough, that she not sign it unless that's what it says, and that it come back to you for subsequent review if that can't be accomplished.
So just to follow up then, Mayor, how would you suggest that we handle this? It seems like all the parties want to go a certain direction, so.
So Brian's last, I think that'll probably be the best. Let's put it through and then let me know what you want me. I'll trust Bill to personally reach out to me and kind of walk me through this so that we don't make a mistake.
And if I could throw 2 cents in, too.
If you are going to, yeah, first.
I can weigh in on it.
Yes, I understood that, but first you need permission from the chair to speak, and then you need to speak into the microphone.
Mr. Stewart, did you have a comment first?
Seems like to me we should approve it and let the mayor decide based on Public Works input. I don't think we should tie her hands, our Public Works hands. There might be that you can't do the sidewalk next to the curb economically. So I wouldn't be in favor of changing it. I'd be in favor of approving it as is, let the administration work with Public Works to see if it's possible to do it, knowing the neighborhood wants it, knowing the council would like it if possible, knowing that the developer would prefer it, but it might not be possible. So let's not tie anyone's hands.
And just a minute, Mr. Hunter, we'll have you. My question too is, if we do something in this meeting that, will it designate who has to pay for moving those power lines? In other words, the developer doesn't want to pay to move the power lines, and I'm sure Public Work or the power company doesn't want to pay for the power lines. So if we make a decision that those power lines need to be moved, then are we taking the responsibility then to move them? Or we didn't know about the power, at least I didn't know about the power lines till just a few minutes ago. So I'm not sure how to make the decision now, if it has an implication on how moving those power lines are paid for.
So we're seeing problems with power lines on Second West, up by the rec center, where they weren't considered, and now it's a big deal. You got to bury them. They're too close to the building. And we don't want to have issues where, we have to go to great expense, either moving power lines or burying them. So I like what George said. Everyone knows what's wanted, but there's practical constraints that may limit the outcome. If I've seen it in other neighborhoods where it's not a power line issue, it's just a preference. Like for years, it had the sidewalk right up to the curb, and then the standards change, and here comes a new development, and it's totally out of sync with the other, and everyone goes, "What's happening here?" Well, that's to me a preference, and frankly, if it's some kind of state or national standard, that's one thing. If it's our code, well, we could probably change that. But in this case, it's a matter of power lines, which I think we ought to leave in the administration's hands.
And just for the record, the power line issue on 200 West was not a city issue. I think it's important to recognize that this was a developer mistake. So the city knew what they were doing. They made the right decisions for that. It was the developer that made the mistake.
Mr. Hunter, you had a comment, would you?
Just the context. We initially had the site plan designed with the sidewalks on the outside, and Public Works, they came in and they said it was a safety issue, and then they're making it a citywide thing where they're, anything new going in, the sidewalk is going to be inset. But it makes it very strange because it comes down by Stadium Terrace and then jogs in 7 feet. And if Stadium Terrace and all the other apartments never change, it's going to be an outlier for 30 to 100 years. But the original plan was that it was going to be on the outside. But Mr. Stewart and Mr. Connect have said it exactly. We can't commit to something in a development agreement that says that's what we're going to do when it is totally out of our hands. I mean, I think we have a compelling argument with Public Works, and I think with Mr. Pepperoni helping out and lending his weight, we should be able to resolve it, but we can't commit to it.
Well, that was the comment that I was just going to make is, thank goodness we just, Bill's going to love me for saying this, but thank goodness we just created the Department of Development Services and authorized the department director of that department to make final decisions within code, right?
Mr. Hanley.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a few things. I mean, I know we have a lot of really very hardworking neighborhood chairs. I think Paul is one of our most hardworking and thorough, and and I also have great respect for Warner. So knowing that you're slightly on different sides on this is an interesting dilemma. Obviously, you're speaking for lots of other people, so I don't pretend to assume that the two voices we've heard from in that neighborhood are the only ones, obviously, but they're the ones we heard this evening from that neighborhood. I just would want to say that I would not consider this a fait accompli, but it has been thoroughly vetted. And I think that's actually what I think is important to recognize on the part of the council, that whatever decision we make tonight, and certainly the decision I feel inclined to make to support this, is a reflection of my respect for and acknowledgement for that due diligence that's been done. And the recognition, of course, as the applicant made clear, not everything, not everyone got everything they wanted. But I have to say that Paul Evans is no pushover. I have I'm a personal witness to this, so I know I don't take it lightly that this has gone through the process and gotten to this point. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I would also say, I mean, I'm very, it's not a comfortable thing to tell somebody that their quality of life should be compromised, because I think they should be able to take that in the teeth and be happy. I think that's a hard thing to do, but it is a hard thing to protect the quality of life in neighborhoods throughout the city, while also growing as a city, and recognizing that if you don't allow for a variety of housing types and affordable, of different levels of affordability and for different demographics throughout the city, you actually can't protect the kind of quality of life within the neighborhoods that you want, and still grow as a city at the same time. So it's a tough it's a tough decision. But I think what I do like about this is its proximity to the campus, its proximity to public transportation. I think it bodes well for being a walkable neighborhood. And I don't know if this is helpful or not. I served in an ecclesiastical function for married students at BYU, and they're some of the finest people I've ever been around. So I think in the end, hopefully this doesn't feel like a group of strangers that have moved in, but a group of very good people who make a valuable contribution to the community. So I'm comfortable supporting this.
Mr. Sewell.
So I'd just like to comment on a couple of the concerns that were raised. One is a concern about setting a precedent for higher density creeping northward into lower density residential areas. I feel like this density is appropriate for this area specifically because of it's right next to the stadium, it's extremely close to the BYU campus, and it's very close to mass transit. I don't think that we're making any kind of statement at all that this kind of density is necessarily appropriate farther away from a high traffic road, farther away from BYU campus, farther away from mass transit. So the reason I'm supporting it is because of those things. There was also a concern raised about traffic. Canyon Road is, what is it? Is it a collector or an arterial? It's a collector. It's an arterial road. So that's the highest in our hierarchy, isn't it? Yeah, in terms of its capacity to handle traffic. So it can handle a lot of traffic, and I just don't see very many people that live there having a reason to go up and down Stadium Avenue. So I don't think the impact will be very great to that quieter, lower density housing area there from traffic. The other comment I wanted to make that Mr. Woodworth made in his very eloquent and passionate remarks, I sincerely do not believe that anyone's support for this is based on how much money the people in that area make. I was trying to think of some of the richest areas of the city, and like Northgate maybe, or if you took that development and put it right where Pleasant View neighborhood is, I don't see us making any different decisions. So that's my personal opinion. It certainly hasn't affected my feelings about the project, and I'd be very surprised if the financial status of the surrounding residents has affected anyone's opinion up here tonight. And so those are my feelings about the project.
Any other comments from council? We have two items, and we'll deal with them separately for voting purposes. Item 13 is the ordinance amending the general plan designation. And we have an implied motion on that. If we're ready to vote, all those in favor of that applied motion? And that vote is unanimous, excusing Mr. Harding. Second item is an ordinance amending the zone map classification of the same property from public facilities to campus mixed use. And
Mr. Chair,
yes.
before you call for a vote on that item, just to clarify one thing, in your materials, there are actually two different versions of the ordinance. One that, and we probably should have reduced it to one now that I think about it, because it was pretty clear from all the discussion in our last meeting that a development agreement was intended or likely. But right now in your materials, you have both a non-development agreement version and a development agreement version. So before you vote on the actual action, I would look for a motion to use the development agreement version of the ordinance as the subject of the implied motion.
Have somebody make that motion?
So moved.
Mr.
Well, I guess I should specify which option I'm moving. I move that we make the version with the development agreement,
The development agreement.
the implied motion.
Is it, second by George Hanley.
Just a question in that, we did have two development agreements. One's been signed. The one that we're voting on now is the one that we just read.
Right, so yeah, to clarify, my understanding of the motion, let me know if you agree with this, Mr. Sewell, is that you would use the version of the ordinance that authorizes the development agreement, and that the current exhibit to that ordinance would be the development agreement that was just on screen a few moments ago that was just agreed to in the last few hours. Is that correct?
Yes,
Mr.
that
Sewell?
was my motion.
And does that agreement, is that the one that states the mayor will do the negotiating, then the issue with the parking strip and the sidewalk will be handled that way? Is that?
Nothing about the development agreement mentions this. If you, Bryce, go back to the ordinance. Sorry, and scroll down to part 2. So right there in part 1, the mayor is authorized to negotiate and execute a development agreement as proposed in a form substantially similar. So you're delegating to the mayor authority to negotiate the final agreement with, I think, the understanding of everybody in the room that that may involve changing the site plan exhibit to the development agreement.
Okay. So we have a motion then to adopt the development agreement.
Version of the ordinance with the current exhibit.
Yeah, okay. So I was clear on that? I think I am. I think everyone else already is. All in favor of that motion? So that motion is unanimous. And so then we'll go ahead and look for will we have an implied motion to amend the zone map classification with that development agreement? So we'll look for a vote for that. All in favor? And that's also unanimous with Mr. Harding excused. Okay, I think that brings us to our last 3 items have been continued. So if there are no objections, we'll adjourn this meeting by unanimous consent.
Good day.